समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया.
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
अब समझा.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for international and strategic affairs, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on geopolitical developments around the world. To begin with, Swasti, today's first question is on Greenland, and it's a question by Anurag Upadhyay, who wants to know that aren't there legal barriers that can prevent the USA to annex Greenland? And if there's a two-third majority of Senate required for a treaty-based acquisition and along with continued Congress funding, then it will not come easily, especially after midterm election. In that case, do you think Trump just wants Greenland and maybe whoever the next president is will give it back?
No, very quickly, you're right. I mean, taking Greenland, I know where this is coming from because, what Trump has done in Venezuela has somewhere confirmed the fears of the world community that Trump can go to any extent to basically um, carry out his wishes. So the fears around Greenland are genuine. And, you may be noticing a lot of statements coming from the European leaders that are reinstating again and again that Greenland sovereignty is not up for Donald Trump to decide, etc. Now, very quickly, in terms of legal hurdles, yes, of course, any lawful acquisition or whether by purchase or by treaty, this is going to require a Senate approval and an act from the Congress. So it is not going to come easily. Second, if you are aware, it was very recently that Representative Jimmy Gomez, who is from California, has actually moved a bill, right, preventing Trump from taking any unilateral action on Greenland because it is Greenland sovereignty protection bill. So things are, I mean, there are legal complications without a doubt. Now the question is that Trump would still like to do it, and if you carefully hear the discussion that is coming from its inner circles, and particularly what Marco Rubio is saying, because if you look at the Venezuela case, it was Marco Rubio's brainchild in so many ways. So what Marco Rubio has been saying again and again, that while yes, the military option is on the table, which is more of a pressure tactic, they are talking about buying Greenland, and when they say buying Greenland, what they basically mean is that, there are about 56,000 people that are living in Greenland, and they plan to give something like $100,000 to each. So, in that sense, the cost that would incurred by the United States in order to buy Greenland would be close to whatever, 56,000 people into $100,000 each. Now, it's not a very big amount of money, considering, how Donald Trump has been saying again and again that Greenland is very important for America's safety. But then again, you have to come back to something else. One is that whether the Greenlanders would agree to it, right? So it is true that, in the last few years, Greenlanders have got some autonomous position in order to decide who they want to go with. But if you look at the recent statements, they have all said that we are not up for sale. And, I mean, this has been a repeated rhetoric. Now, quickly, what it leaves Trump with is that you should know that, and if you look at the map, you will come to know that during the Cold War years, particularly in the 50s and the 60s, you look at the number of bases that US had in Greenland, and over the years until today, um, those bases have been reduced. The number of the bases have been reduced, and today you only have one, which is Pitofic, and that's one base. So one of the things that I see happening in the case of Greenland is that Donald Trump is going to, sort of take a de facto control of the military activities in and around the island, which is actually up for discussion from the European side also. What is not up for discussion is, unlawful sale of the island or a military invasion, because that would effectively render NATO ineffective and NATO would collapse because Denmark and the US are both founding members of the NATO. So I personally do not think that we have anything as dramatic in the offing, especially when it comes to Greenland. But there could be a possibility of US gaining a de facto control of military facilities, US adding or the number of deployments, more troops, etc., in and around the region, getting into those kind of things with the approval of Denmark and other European allies, maybe also pressurizing them for it. I mean, US is very much capable of that, but like a full-fledged invasion, something that you saw in Venezuela, I mean, Venezuela and Greenland or Denmark, they are not in the same boat. So don't make that analytical mistake that just because Donald Trump is whimsical and has come across as somebody who's so unilateral in his decisions, would just treat all of these with the same methodology. I do not see that. I could be wrong, but then I don't see that there is a case strong enough for him to get into a shooting war with the Europeans at this stage. It's not required.
On that note, Swasti, since we are already discussing Venezuela, a lot has happened in Venezuela in the past week, and we have a bunch of questions on that.
Hmm.
I will lead first with Shivani Das Mali's question on now following the US action in Venezuela, can we say that Donald Trump is reviving the Monroe Doctrine?
For that, we have to first understand what is Monroe Doctrine. I think many of these terms are just used very sweepingly. So, Monroe Doctrine was declared by another president of the United States, whose name was James Monroe. It came in 1823, and basically, it became a foundational US foreign policy, stating that European affairs are better left to Europe, and America is better in its isolation in the Western Hemisphere. So that is the only relevance of why we are discussing Monroe Doctrine again and again, because from the new national security strategy, it was very categorically mentioned that America is going to be sort of, focusing more on the Western Hemisphere. And from there, people drew a lot of corollaries that, all right, that means to say that Indo-Pacific is left for China and the East Europe is left for Russia, etc., etc. Now, that's Monroe Doctrine. So with Venezuela, quickly, I do not agree with the fact, and in fact, my last column was on it, that I don't think the world today, because it is so interconnected and because the issues are cross cutting so much, you cannot really look at a siloed version of this theater belonging to US, that theater belonging to China, this theater belonging to Russia, so on and so forth, because it also somewhere operates on the principle that China, Russia, and US are almost equal to each other, which is definitely not the case. I mean, on the one hand, look at the economic might, military might, technological might, there is no way that you can actually treat them as equal sort of partners. That's one part. Having said that, there is some truth to the fact that the manner in which Trump has sort of doubled down on making sure that he's able to carry out with his wishes in Venezuela shows that he's very serious about America's influence and interest in its backyard. And by the way, it's not just Venezuela. Trump's rhetoric on Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua have been pretty much consistent from his first term to his second term. And Maduro, particularly since we have been discussing Venezuela, ever since he lost his elections in July 2024, after which he fudged the results and he came back, Maduro's elections have not been legitimized by anybody in the region, except for Cuba, of course. Cuba is of course, hands and glove kind of a, supporter of Maduro. By the way, not even by Brazil. So a lot of people think that just because Brazil is a BRICS member and Brazil has condemned, yes, Brazil has condemned US's actions, which was kidnapping somebody in broad daylight or broad midnight, whatever. But it is not the same as saying that Brazil granted him the legitimacy. So quickly to your question on whether it's a revival of the Monroe Doctrine, there is a revival, yes, but again, please be mindful of the context. The world is not offering itself in the same silos. Technologically, we are much more connected. And even if you look at the actions in Venezuela, in my last column, I also mentioned how whatever US does to crack down on Maduro's regime in Venezuela is having a bearing on Iran, because Hezbollah had very active camps in Venezuela. I've written about that in the column. It's in the description box. You can read about it. In fact, just a couple of days after I published the column, then there was a story in FT as well. So, long story short, what I mean to say is that the interconnections of the world are such, okay, and the cross cutting of these issues are such that you are not able to make sense of what US is doing in Venezuela is sort of relegating itself and limiting itself. That's one part. The cross cutting of the issues is such. And second, if the US is so keen on focusing only on the Western Hemisphere, then what the hell is the US doing threatening Iran today? What the hell is US doing striking ISIS targets in Nigeria today? What the hell is US doing in Greenland, which is very much a European affair, and entangling itself with Europe? If the Monroe Doctrine is to be taken in letter and spirit, so please take it with a pinch of salt. It is about America's interests, and America's interests are more entwined than what meets the eye. It's just that before Donald Trump, you don't really have a precedent where somebody did something as audacious, and that is why perhaps everybody is talking about this revival. It's a revival, but take it with a pinch of salt. It is about America's interest, and I think Donald Trump has become extremely brazen and unabashed in pursuing them.
Similar questions on Venezuela, Swasti. This
Mhm.
is from Shreyas Darne, who wants to know about India's reaction to Venezuela and why
Okay.
it was consistently silent, and whether this silent stance will hurt us since every other BRICS country except India has strongly condemned the Maduro kidnapping.
Now, quickly, the BRICS countries ideologically would, you would expect that they would be opposed to US's dadagiri in Venezuela, which is fine. But I just told you that we need to read the fine print, and because these theaters are so far away, that we are also suffering from many of our own preconceived notions. कि लूला है तो वो तो against में बोलेगा ही. अरे भाई लूला against में बोल रहा है, but Lula has not legitimized Maduro's regime. In fact, one of the reasons why Maduro's regime fell so quickly was because he did not have regional support except for Cuba, right? Argentina welcomed it, Brazil condemned it, but like I said, that Brazil had not legitimized, had not accepted Maduro's election result. So, in the eyes of Brazil, Maduro was already an illegitimate president of Venezuela. Number two, you should know, it was Brazil under Lula that blocked Venezuela's entry into BRICS, even though China and Russia supported it. Number three, Brazil had deployed forces on its borders with Guyana, right? Because Venezuela has been doing its own dadagiri on Guyana. And by the way, India had sent two Dornier aircrafts to Guyana for patrolling. So you must understand that because of his notoriety, he did not really have a regional support base. And that is why when he fell, when he was kidnapped, though Brazil condemned it strongly, but frankly, if you see, Brazil has not done anything about it. Now, this is not the same for China and Russia because, of course, though these two powers have a completely different game, these are extra-regional powers. Russia had a lot of, security apparatus, and all of that in Venezuela that did not work. China was there for a different set of reasons. China had many investments in Venezuela. But like, if you've been noticing the GPS, earlier in our previous episodes, I have gone on record saying again and again that even if something like this were to happen to Maduro, China and Russia would not be able to do anything except for giving certain lip service. And this is in many ways what has happened. Not because they wanted to, but quickly in today's geopolitical timing, Russia doesn't have the bandwidth, to do anything. And I think that's been very clear after Assad's ouster, etc. So this as a precedent. Now coming to India, why India has not condemned quickly. One, because India did not condemn Russia's invasion in Ukraine, which is not a parallel to what US has done in Venezuela, because in my opinion, in Europe you have a bloody war going on for the last 4 years with no real end in sight. We all have approximations with no real end in sight. So India did not condemn that, so it made sense for India to stay away from this one as well. Number one. Number two, because India has so much at stake with the United States today. Now, whether you want to look at it in terms of India not standing on its own self respect, I mean, these arguments do not hold in international relations because it is your nation's interest. If you have a relationship of $200 billion of trade, of remittances, of 5 million diaspora, of a technological relationship, of defense and everything that we have built with the US in the last 20 years, yes, Donald Trump is an aberration, but India's interests require that trade deal to be signed. And at this stage, for a very, very different faraway war, it doesn't make sense for India to condemn it. I know this is not a popular opinion, and many in India have asked the Indian government to condemn it. But then again, I mean, you could just go on with this whataboutery saying that why didn't India condemn this and why didn't India condemn that? Ultimately, I think a nation's actions should be judged in with the lens of its national interest. Today, we have something much higher at stake with the United States. I personally think India's MEA did a good pragmatic job by just lying low, because we really need to sort our own national interest first with the US. And frankly, with Donald Trump, I think it is better to be cautious than sorry.
Right. Again, moving on to a separate set of questions. This is from Satyapragyan Das, who says that with the events now in Venezuela, how will this affect Lula's re-election bid in Brazil
Hmm.
and the prospects of Gustavo Petro's party in Colombia?
Hmm.
And could this sort of geopolitical shift then benefit left parties the way it has for center left parties in Canada and Australia?
Now, in my reading is just going to be the opposite, okay? And Brazil, okay, so Lula is going to run again. The elections are going to happen in 2026, okay? And Lula is quite old; he's turning 80, but he has said that, oh, I'm fine and I'm fit as a fiddle, blah blah. But long story short, there has been a rise of the right wing in Latin America, and if the economies start doing well, let's say if there is a turn of fate for Venezuela in a few years, it obviously shows that the right wing is there to stay. I mean, you do see that in several countries. In fact, there is a question on Bolivia, and I wanted to also mention that Bolivia also had its first sort of right wing president after many years of left wing rule. So, if you are able to see that the right wing ruled countries are able to perform better economically. I mean, Lula has done a good job in Brazil, and that's why he's being, re-elected. So don't ever be under the impression that what Maduro was to Venezuela or what the Cuban regime is to Cuba, this is what Brazil, Lula is to Brazil. Not at all. Brazil, Lula has done some, good work. Having said that, because the surge of the right wing is such a, and b, if the right wing governments are able to extract concessions from the United States that are actually beneficial to them and their people, of course, it would create a bit of a cloud. So, if the question is asked with this intent that Donald Trump's behavior or Donald Trump's kidnapping of Maduro is going to turn the people of the region against right wing governments, I don't see that trend at all.
And Swasti, since we did discuss Bolivia, I'll take the next question from Jay Sachdev, who wants to know that how is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela different from Bolivia?
Now that's an interesting question because the formal name of Venezuela is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and then there is a country called Bolivia. Now, quickly from Indian perspective, they all seem to be in the Latin American theater, but there is a little difference, and I'll tell you what. While both of them are named after the revolutionary Simon
Simon
Bolivar,
Bolivar.
but Venezuela is on the northern side of South America, which is like near the Caribbean Sea and all that, and Bolivia is in the central part of South America, so it's landlocked, and Venezuela is certainly not landlocked. So that's first difference. Now you have to understand something interesting. While Bolivia is the one that carries the name of Simon Bolivar, but frankly, Eva Morales, who was the long standing president of Bolivia, left wing, actually lost in November last year. And ever since a new government has come, which is right wing, they have really mended their relations with the United States. Okay. And in fact, if you look at the United States official documents, they say the Secretary of State actually visited Bolivia last year to reinstate their relations after a gap of 20 years. So it's just a kind of a tragedy of sorts that Venezuela, that took on the name of Simon Bolivar, that president is kidnapped by the United States, but the Bolivian current government is having a good tie,
With the
you
US.
know, with the US. So this is the by and large the difference. And what happened in Bolivia also shows the rise of the right wing in whole of Latin America, because Latin America has was being governed by different kinds of left wing governments throughout, and that is the point that I was trying to make. So if the people in the region are able to see that these new governments are able to extract benefits from this reinstating of relationship with the United States, if they're able to get their sanctions lifted, if they're able to get money, if they're able to get development infrastructure, this is going to be actually an attractive pursuit for the people in the region, because the people in the region are also fed up of many of these socialist regimes turning opaque, becoming corrupt, etc., etc. Why do you think Maduro lost his influence? He lost his influence because of what he had perpetuated in the last 20 years. So in that sense, this is a difference, and in many ways this is a bit of a win for the US foreign policy. Yeah, I mean, regardless of how we perceive it.
On a similar tangent, Swasti, there are a lot of questions about China's role regarding Venezuela. And I'll take one which is from Divakar Singh, who
Yeah.
says that now, with the kind of superiority that America has shown in the Venezuela, do you think China will be a bit hesitant to attack Taiwan since it also uses American weapons?
The answer to that is yes. And if I may just add it to another question that is being asked, which is on the performance of weapons, Chinese and Russian weapons in Venezuela, please understand that China is really interested in getting its weapons battle tested. So it got its PL-15 missiles battle tested against India. It gets its drones battle tested, against Houthis sourced via the Emiratis. Similarly, it got its radars battle tested, which didn't work. Okay, against the US. But long story short, the point is that China is drawing these lessons. But frankly, this was also a reiteration of the fact that the advanced US weapons, I mean, they are way too advanced for either the Russian S-300 systems or these Chinese. So we don't have every single detail of it out yet. But what we do know is that the manner in which the US carried out this operation, the manner in which it, did that force application, it is definitely a textbook study, and China would be very, very wary of doing anything similar. I mean, this is a big deterrent in its own way. Although it gives China a bit of a, you know, like a clean chit of doing something and getting away with it, provided it has the ability to do it. I doubt China has the ability to do that. So a clean chit morally and ethically speaking, yes, but the technical lesson is that US can go to this extent, and the US weapons are very advanced. So in that sense, it is a China would be hesitant. That's my reading.
Lots of questions on Venezuela, Swasti. I'll just take a few more. One is something that we already discussed, which is by Yu Meum, which is on the implications for Chinese defense systems, which I think has been discussed. Another is Sunil7053, who wants to know that what could be Trump's endgame with Venezuela and why were China and Russia silent about USA actions in Venezuela?
Now, about China and Russia, I think I've gone on, saying the same thing again and again, which is that it is about the bandwidth. China is going to play the long game. It is going to come back as an economic customer again, right? But as far as Russia was concerned, I told you that it didn't have the bandwidth, to do anything, and which has been very clear ever since Assad fell. Now, quickly, US's end game in Venezuela is to have a regime there which is not adversarial to US interests. And if you see that, I had mentioned it earlier as well, that Maduro was basically negotiating the terms of his exit, and the person who was actually talking to both sides was his VP Delcy Rodriguez. And what the US did very smartly was to install Delcy Rodriguez. And why they did that is because US also has learned from his failures in reinstating democratic governments in very, very adversarial situations, like they did all over Middle East, and it didn't work. So the US wants a kind of a transition to be made, because the military establishment, of course, remains to be powerful. And imagine somebody like Mario Machado or somebody coming back and overthrown by the military or assassinated by the military, which would have created more unrest. So I think the US calculation here is very cold and calculated, which is that you put somebody who is friendlier to the regime and somebody who is an insider that can keep an eye and and yet do that necessary transition. Okay, and if you ask me, I would say that Delcy Rodriguez has shown the right decisions. Okay, as far as from the US's interest is concerned, she's also recalibrating her ties with UK and Europe, so the larger West, and with the US. So I think that's the calculated game. But end of the day, US wants American industries to invest in Venezuela's vast oil reserves. But again, that's a mirage, because if you remember what the Exxon said that it is completely uninvestable, because for so many decades it has been absolutely corrupt, underperforming, completely in tatters. So in order to get that infrastructure running, there are no greenfield projects, nothing. So in order to get it running, you have to inject a lot of capital. Who's going to put that capital, right? So I do see a return of China, okay, whenever times are better. Even many more countries, including India. It is a grand opening for India if we are playing our cards right. And I think that's why India did not condemn US actions too much. You should remember in 2013, India was getting 10% of its total imports from Venezuela. So we have the refinement capabilities, we have all the ecosystem ready. Okay, so if there is an opportunity like that, India should be looking very carefully. The question is that I think it will take some time for Delcy Rodriguez to sort of, create that stable environment for investors to come. Right now, it is way too militarized, it is way too criminalized, it's way too corrupt, and it's way too much in tatters, right? So I don't see this happening in the short term. But let's say if there is a consistent improvement happening in a few years, I think a grand opportunity will open.
Moving on from one conflict to the other, Swasti, we
Mm,
have a question on why UAE and Saudi Arabia are fighting, and this
mm,
is from Fab 2042.
mhm.
Who, of course, the first question is that why UAE and Saudi Arabia are now fighting, and is it a recent phenomenon or is there a underlying cause, and should we expect a complete breakdown and new alignments?
No, it's a very interesting question. I've done an explainer on that, so you can check that out. But in short, it's an intelligent question as well, because I think again, Middle East is also a very hazy theater for us, and perhaps we are looking at UAE and Saudi Arabia in terms of how we multi-align with them. Okay, now quickly, Saudi Arabia and UAE, particularly MBS and MBZ. Okay, so these are supposed to be sort of brother in arms for a long time, around 2017 to 20, those years 2019, 2021. I mean, until those years you do see that they had a different kind of economy. But in short, what has happened is that while if you look at the GCC, Saudi Arabia is the biggest economy, and Saudi Arabia obviously is the biggest, geographically also is the biggest power. UAE has been punching above its weights for a long time now, sometimes also at the extent of Saudi interests. And particularly the manner in which these two powers have been supporting proxies in many endless wars in the region, Yemen being one, then Sudan being another, then there's also Tunisia, there's also others. I mean, there's Libya, there's this whole host of dirty wars that are being played out there. So while there are similarities on the Muslim Brotherhood front, that both these powers, ban the Muslim Brotherhood and do not want that destabilization, which sort of started from the Arab Spring and onwards. But on the other hand, when it came to sort of protecting each other's interest, we did see that UAE went, several notches um,
Up.
up in terms of protecting its interest at the cost of Saudi Arabia. So this particular front in Yemen started as a united front, but eventually in a few years, it became very clear that UAE was playing both sides. Okay, and why does UAE does it? Because UAE is sort of solidifying in the last many years. It has solidified I would say a dual layer of proxies. So one layer is direct proxies, like for example the Sudanese militia that are fighting on the behalf of Emiratis against Houthis. So that's a direct layer. You can see that very clearly. What the game that UAE is playing in Libya, etc. is very clear. Then there is a secondary layer, which is who is controlling the financial networks, and UAE through Abu Dhabi and its financial heft in the region has also been playing that game. So I think what you saw in Yemen was a manifestation of the fact that Saudi Arabia doesn't want to put up with this, because Saudi Arabia wants to tell UAE that, listen, we are the boss still, we are, bigger economy, blah, blah. But then this is also a beginning of a lot of other discomfort in the Middle East. Why? Because if you carefully see, a lot of convergence, a new kind of a convergence is coming up. So what you refer to as a new kind of alignment,
Hmm.
it's not a complete break from the past, but still it adds another layer of complexity, which is that while UAE and Saudi Arabia have been together against Turkey and against Iran, now you see that UAE is getting closer to Israel in its conversions, and Saudi Arabia is getting closer to Turkey in its convergence. Okay, and especially the Saudi Arabia Turkey convergence is going to be exploited by our dear neighbor Pakistan, and that is something that should make us more curious about what is happening in that region. I don't have the time to go into the length and breadth of many of the complexities here, but long story short, this is not a new phenomena. It has manifested now in Yemen. So the situation has really gotten out of hand that it manifested to this extent. Okay, and what happened in Yemen is again not a one-off thing. Please wait for what happens in Sudan. So while in Yemen, UAE has retracted, particularly its official presence, but like I said, that it has a double layer of proxy network there. So it's the proxies plus the financial networks, both of which are governed and controlled by the UAE. So you will see that there is a shifting of the gear. It's not as much as sort of withdrawing completely. Okay, so which basically means that there is much more going on in Middle East than what meets the eye.
Moving on, we have a quite funny question from a user named Strawberry Paratha Swasti, who wants to know that why is your America prem not fading away after everything that has happened? And I will add Karthik Parashar's question to that, where he
Okay.
asks that how long do you think it will take to end the unipolar world?
Now, I'm surprised you call this America Prem because all I've done is Trump bashing. So anyway, now quickly, now with regard to how long will it take for the unipolar world to end? See, the unipolar world has ended. Okay, I'll just tell you what makes it so complex for us to comprehend it. There is a new cold war happening between United States and China, but it doesn't look like the old cold war or the original cold war, okay, which was very clear between two military superpowers, each extending its sphere of influence. I mean, you have a extremely complex cross-cutting world today. So first of all, the unipolar world has ended, even though America remains to be the world's biggest military spender, military power, technological power, and economic power. And that is the reason why Donald Trump is doing his, brazen foreign policy everywhere, because he can get away with it. Okay, no other country can get away with it. Number one. Number two, what you have today is that you have three kinds of orders. You have a global security order, you have a global economic order, and you have a global digital order. Now, the interesting part is that while the global security order is led and dominated by the United States, but United States is no longer the world policeman because United States doesn't have the capabilities. So that is where you have these ideas that United States is relegating to the Western Hemisphere. The fact is the United States doesn't have the capabilities, and many within the Trump administration have said it again that we have to prioritize. We can't be wasting our time in Europe and in Ukraine and here and there. Some say not in Indo-Pacific. Okay, now that's one part. What is happening is that while United States is retreating as the security guarantor to many of its treaty allies, what is happening in this vacuum is not the rise of China. It's not so simple. What is coming in its way is what I keep referring to as subsystems integration, is where you have middle order powers coming together doing very customized solutions for tier 2, tier 3, unending proxy wars all over the world, and you have a very complex pattern emerging. So it's no longer just the United States calling the shots, or just China calling the shots, but you have many countries who have overlapping interest and who are not wanting to take sides. And then the systems integration. Second, the global economic order. Now, the global economic order is already more multipolar, that one country alone, even though United States is the biggest economy, cannot really call the shots. And we saw it very, very clearly why Trump's tariffs could not work against China, because China was the one that had the rare earth dominance. But the point here to understand about the global economic order is that while it is already multipolar, but the nature of that trade, dominance is changing, because if you see, it's not just trade, but it's also about infrastructure, it's also about rare earth, it's about critical minerals, it is about data centers, right? Which is, again, it's not just economy, but it's also a different kind of a technologically enabled economy, which is at heart. And third is a global digital order. And frankly, this is where the contours are emerging right now. And whatever you know of, quantum computing, AI, blah, blah. The fact of the matter is that whoever is dominating the global digital race is going to then dominate the global security order and the global economic order, because the nature of technology is going to be so pervasive. Okay, so you cannot take the role of emerging technology from its reflection. I mean, how it will reflect on, or how will it have a bearing on the global security order and the economic order. And if you carefully see, what I'm trying to tell you here is that these are not watertight silos. These are absolutely interconnected with each other. The technology, we are living in an era of technological leakage. So the end of the unipolar world is already there, but what is emerging in its place is so fuzzy that we are not able to comprehend what it is. But it is certainly a beast that we have never seen before.
With that, Swasti, I will take one final question on Pakistan before we finish this episode, and this is by Ahad,
Hmm.
who says that, do you think that following Operation Sindoor, there has been a noticeable increase in Pakistan's perceived geopolitical relevance?
Hmm.
It's a very long question. I will cut it short to
Hmm.
the core of his question is that, do you think there is a renewed hyphenation between India and Pakistan, and what does it say about
I got
India's
it.
foreign policy?
I got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, rehyphenation, how? Let's just be the devil's advocate. Rehyphenation, how? You have a $500 billion economy, which is hardly growing. You have a 4 trillion economy, which is now the world's fourth largest and soon to be world's third largest, right? I mean, we have to be aware of our success and we have to be aware of our strengths. There is no comparison in that domain with India and Pakistan. That's one part. And that's where the comfort ends. Okay. The second part is rise of Pakistan's geopolitical profile. Yes, it is true that Operation Sindoor has landed Pakistan in a sweet spot, where Pakistan's narrative has been more accepted internationally, regardless of what India has been saying, because Pakistan has capitalized on the first night, India has capitalized on other parts. I'm not getting into the version war here. What I'm saying, of course, as an Indian, of course, I know that, my Air Force did what it did. But coming to, the rise of Pakistan's diplomatic stature, it is a fact. It has happened. Number two, I think what India needs to be careful about is, to be able to tell propaganda from reality. So, for example, there's so much of this news of Pakistan getting orders for its J-17 aircraft because of how they took down a Rafale. Okay, that's been the propaganda. Now we all know that part of it is true. Something like that did happen. But having said that, the number of orders that have been reported across some media houses are absolutely astonishing. I mean, if Pakistan really have the capability to do that? To do that, if you look at the J-17, it's very idhar ki eat, idhar ka roda kind of a aircraft where the engines are coming from Russia, the avionics are coming from China, the radars have come from Italy and from Turkey, some part is coming from the British, etc., etc. So, how are you actually assessing that Pakistan, with an annual capacity of about 20 aircraft per annum, is able to deliver these 120 aircrafts that have been promised? Okay, so there is part propaganda, part truth in such things. We have to be careful of analyzing what part is technically sound and what part is not. But having said that, I think the key takeaway of Operation Sindoor is that India must work on doubling down on its strengths and addressing its vulnerabilities. The lessons have been drawn, of course, but like I said, that the unnerving things about wars is that the weapons are not tested for once. It is a continuous process. So we have to be also careful of not just Pakistan, but a Pakistan which is backed by China. Okay, and that we provided a platform for the Chinese PL-15s to be tested, and based on their performance, China has already taken its lessons. So when we talk about Pakistan, we have to talk about the Chinese hand therein, that we're providing them all the intelligence, etc., etc., and prepare our response and prepare our readiness, not just in with respect to Pakistan, with whom of course we have an edge, but with respect to China, where China has an exponential edge over us. So that is what makes it complicated. And diplomatically, I have alluded to the fact that it has led to a particular rise in Pakistan's diplomatic stature that is perceived across the Middle East, as well as all the favors that my favorite field marshal has been getting from Mr. Donald Trump. But yes, like I said, that we don't need to rehyphenate ourselves with a 4 trillion and a 500 billion. I mean, that's where our strength is, and we have to capitalize on our strength.
On that note, Swasti, we end this episode for today. We look forward to your questions for next week. See you in a fresh new episode.